Lieutenant Kim Hana felt her stomach drop as the transport shuttle shuddered to a halt. Through the small porthole, she could see the massive structure of Kepler Station stretching out in all directions like a glittering city in space. The Galactic Defense Academy was the most prestigious military school in known space, and somehow, impossibly, she was here. Her boots made sharp clicking sounds on the strange crystal floor as she stepped out. Everything around her seemed to glow with its own light. The walls, the ceiling, even the air itself seemed different here. This wasn't like the metal corridors of Earth's space stations. This was alien technology beyond anything she had ever imagined. But it wasn't the station that made her pause. It was the other cadets. A group of Vorthak stood near the landing platform, their bodies looking like living glass. She could actually see through their skin to the strange organs underneath. When they moved, light seemed to dance inside them like colored water. They were beautiful in a way that made her feel small and rough by comparison. The Nixari were harder to look at. Each one had at least 6 arms, sometimes 8, all moving independently as they manipulated different devices at once. Their heads were large and bulbous, with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. When one of them noticed her staring, all its arms stopped moving simultaneously, which was somehow more unsettling than their constant motion. Then there were the ethereals. They didn't walk at all. They simply floated a few inches off the ground, their bodies shifting between solid and translucent. Instead of speaking, patterns of light rippled across their skin like living tattoos. She watched 2 of them having what seemed to be an intense conversation entirely through rapid flashes of blue and green light. Every single one of them stopped what they were doing to stare at her. Hana had known this would happen. Earth was still new to the galactic community. Most of these species had been part of the Galactic Alliance for thousands of years. To them, humans were primitives who had barely figured out how to leave their own solar system. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked, measuring her, judging her. The worst part was that she understood why. Earth was what the galactic community called a death world. The gravity was too high, the radiation too strong, the weather too violent. Most species needed environmental suits just to visit Earth's surface. The fact that humans had evolved there at all was considered either a miracle or a cosmic joke, depending on who you asked. Director Vel Prime was waiting for her at the registration desk. He was a Centaurian, which meant he looked vaguely reptilian but stood upright like a human. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency as he sorted through holographic documents, and his golden scales caught the station's strange light. When he looked up at her, his expression made it clear exactly what he thought of having a human in his academy. "So," he said, his voice carrying the particular tone people used when they were trying to be polite but failing. "You're the Deathworlder." The word hit her like a slap. She had heard it before, of course, but never said with quite so much disdain. He made it sound like she was some kind of dangerous animal that had wandered into a library. "Lieutenant Kim Hana, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Reporting for combat training." Vel Prime made a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so cold. "Combat training," he repeated, looking at his holographic tablet. "Yes, I've read your file. Your planet's environmental conditions are extreme. High gravity, dangerous radiation levels, violent weather patterns. I suppose that explains why your species tends toward such aggressive tendencies." He tapped something on his tablet, and Hana felt her heart sink as she saw her assignment appear on the screen. "Training Group Omega," Vel Prime announced. "Our entry-level program, designed for species who need extra time to adapt to proper military protocols." Hana knew what that really meant. Omega Group was where they put the cadets they expected to fail. It was military school's polite way of saying, "We don't think you belong here, but we have to let you try." The quarters they assigned her were barely large enough for her single bunk and a small storage locker. The walls were thin, and she could hear everything happening in the neighboring rooms. Her equipment was clearly second-hand, older models, that other cadets had probably discarded years ago. Even her uniform didn't fit quite right. Her roommate was a young Nexari named Click 7, who spent most of her time studying with all 6 arms simultaneously, reading different texts while taking notes and operating a computer. She was polite enough, but Hana could tell she was curious about sharing space with what she probably considered a primitive. That first night, lying on her narrow bunk, Hana could hear her neighbors talking through the thin walls. They were Aquarians, their voices making soft bubbling sounds as they spoke. "Did you see the human today?" one of them asked. "The Deathworlder?" "Yes, poor thing. I almost feel sorry for it. Vel Prime put her in Omega Group. She'll probably wash out within a few days." "It's for the best, really. These species from violent worlds never understand proper warfare. They think combat is about brutality and aggression." "Exactly. War is an art form. It requires finesse, strategy, elegance. You can't just throw yourself at the enemy and hope for the best. That's probably all they know how to do on their world. Survival of the strongest and all that." Hana closed her eyes and tried to ignore the conversation, but their words stung more than she wanted to admit. She had worked her entire career to get here. She had graduated top of her class from Earth's military academy, served with distinction in 3 different combat zones, and earned recommendations from some of the most respected officers in the Terran Defense Force. But none of that mattered here. Here she was just another Deathworlder who probably didn't understand real warfare. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Hana made herself a promise. She would show them exactly what a human could do when properly motivated. They thought they understood combat, but they had never seen what someone from Earth was truly capable of. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The alarm buzzed at exactly 600 hours, and Hana rolled out of her bunk feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her muscles were still adjusting to the station's artificial gravity, which was somehow both lighter than Earth's but felt wrong in ways she couldn't explain. Everything here felt artificial, controlled, sanitized. She made her way to the mess. Holland spotted Lee Junho sitting alone at a corner table. He was the only other human at the academy, having arrived just one day after her. Seeing a familiar face should have been comforting, but when she approached his table, he shook his head slightly. "Different training groups," he said quietly. "They split us up on purpose, probably don't want us working together." Hana understood. The academy wanted to see how individual humans performed, not how they worked as a team. It was another small reminder that they were here as specimens to be studied, not cadets to be trained. The holographic training chambers were unlike anything Hana had ever seen. The walls, floor, and ceiling could become literally anything the computers wanted them to be. One moment you were standing in an empty white room, the next you were on the surface of an alien planet with 2 suns burning overhead. The technology was so advanced that she could feel heat from the artificial suns and smell the strange flowers that weren't really there. Instructor Zeph Prime, a tall ethereal whose body constantly shifted between solid and translucent, floated at the front of the group. When he spoke, his words appeared as floating text in the air since his species had no vocal cords. The text read, "Today we begin with a basic fortress assault scenario. This is a standard exercise used throughout the galaxy to test tactical thinking and team coordination." The chamber around them transformed into a rocky landscape. In the distance, an imposing fortress rose from the ground, its walls gleaming with energy shields. Between them and the fortress was open ground with very little cover. "The objective is simple," the floating text continued. "Breach the fortress defenses and secure the power core. You will work in teams of 4. Standard protocols apply. Maintain formation. Follow designated approach routes and remember that this is a simulation. Injured cadets will be transported to medical stations for revival and can rejoin the exercise." Hana found herself grouped with 3 alien cadets, Krista 9, a Vorthak whose crystalline body sparkled with inner light, Gloop Beta, an Aquarian, whose gelatinous form rippled as he moved, and Skrit 12, a Nexari whose 6 arms were already manipulating various pieces of equipment. She watched the first team attempt the exercise. They moved like they were performing a dance they had practiced 1,000 times. The team leader, a proud Centaurian, raised his hand and pointed toward the fortress. His teammates fell into perfect formation behind him, their movements precise and coordinated. They advanced across the open ground in textbook fashion, using available cover points in the exact sequence that military manuals throughout the galaxy probably recommended. When they reached the fortress walls, they set up their equipment in neat, organized patterns and began a systematic assault on the main gate. The fortress defenders, controlled by the simulation's AI, responded with equally predictable tactics. Energy beams lanced out from the walls, striking the attacking cadets with surgical precision. When a cadet was hit, they would cry out dramatically, clutch their wound, and retreat to a medical station where holographic medics would treat them. It was all very civilized, very organized, very polite. It was also completely wrong. Hana had seen real combat zones during her service with the Terran Defense Force. She had been in situations where people were actually trying to kill her, not participating in some elaborate military theater. Watching these aliens play at war was like watching children play with toy soldiers. When her team's turn came, Krista immediately began organizing them into the same formation the previous team had used. "I will take point position," he announced, his internal light pulsing with confidence. "Gloop Beta, you provide covering fire from position 2. Scrit 12, you handle technical support from position 3. Kim Hana, you follow in position 4 and observe proper protocols." Position 4, the spot reserved for the weakest team member, the one expected to contribute the least. "Actually," Hana said, studying the fortress through the chamber's artificial airs, "I have a different idea." Krista Nine's light patterns shifted to what she was learning to recognize as confusion. "Different idea, but the approach routes are clearly marked. The manual specifies exactly how this exercise should be completed." "The manual assumes the enemy is following the same rules we are," Hana replied, already moving away from the group. "But real enemies don't read manuals." Before anyone could stop her, she was running toward the fortress, but not in the direction they expected. Instead of heading for the main gate like every other team, she angled toward the left side of the structure where the walls met a rocky outcropping. Her teammates' voices crackled through her communication device. "Kim Hana, you're deviating from the planned approach. Return to formation immediately." But Hana was already at the base of the fortress wall, studying its construction. The energy shields covered the obvious attack points, but like all defensive systems, they had gaps. Weak points that existed because the designers assumed attackers would behave predictably. She pulled off her equipment belt and began fashioning climbing gear from components that were supposed to be used for entirely different purposes. Her multi-tool became a python, her communication cable became a climbing rope, and her emergency ration packs became counterweights. The fortress's AI defenders were programmed to watch for frontal assaults, flanking maneuvers, and aerial attacks. They were not programmed to watch for a single attacker free climbing up their supposedly impregnable walls using improvised equipment. Hana found the ventilation intake she had spotted during her initial reconnaissance. It was barely large enough for a human to squeeze through, which was probably why none of the larger alien species had ever considered it a viable entry point. Inside the fortress, the corridors were dark and empty. The AI had concentrated all its defenses on the walls and gates, assuming that no attacker could possibly breach the outer perimeter. Hana moved through the structure like a ghost, using her knowledge of human architecture to navigate the alien layout. The power core was exactly where she expected it to be, in the center of the structure, protected by multiple layers of security that were all facing outward. She approached it from behind, disabled the control systems using techniques she had learned during her sabotage training, and watched as the entire fortress went dark. The simulation ended abruptly. The rocky landscape vanished, replaced by the white walls of the training chamber. Her teammates stood frozen in the middle of the field, still in their perfect formation, still preparing for an assault that was no longer necessary. The exercise timer showed that she had completed the objective in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The previous record had been 23 minutes. Krista Nine's entire body began flickering with rapid light patterns that she didn't recognize, but his agitation was obvious. "You violated 17 different engagement protocols. That was completely against regulations. That was cheating." Hana wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at her teammate calmly. "That was winning. But you didn't follow the proper procedures. You didn't maintain formation. You didn't use the designated approach routes. You didn't even inform your team of your intentions." The objective was to secure the power core, Hana replied. Mission accomplished. From the observation deck above, the training chamber, she could see Director Vel Prime studying the exercise data on his holographic displays. His golden scales seemed darker than usual, and all 4 of his arms were moving with agitated precision as he reviewed the footage of her performance. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could read his body language well enough. These humans were going to be a problem. Good, she thought. It was about time someone showed them what real warfare looked like. By the 3rd week, whispers followed Hana everywhere she went. In the mess hall, conversations stopped when she sat down. In the corridors, groups of alien cadets would pause their discussions and watch her pass with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Her unconventional victories in the training simulations had spread throughout the academy like wildfire. The breaking point came during her latest exercise. She had been assigned to a supposedly impossible scenario involving urban warfare in a city under siege. While her alien teammates followed standard doctrine and got systematically eliminated by the AI defenders, Hana had disappeared into the city's underground tunnel system and emerged behind enemy lines 3 hours later, having neutralized the entire opposing force single-handedly. Director Vel Prime had watched the entire exercise from the observation deck, his 4 arms moving with increasing agitation as the human cadet systematically dismantled everything the Academy considered proper military strategy. When the simulation ended, he made a decision that would change everything. Hana was in her quarters, cleaning her equipment, when her door chimed. She opened it to find Vel Prime himself standing in the corridor, flanked by 2 Academy security officers. His golden scales seemed darker than usual, and his expression was harder than she had ever seen it. Lieutenant Kim Hana, he said formally, you are being transferred to Advanced Training Protocol 7, effective immediately. Hana felt her stomach drop. She had heard whispers about Protocol 7 from other cadets. It wasn't really training so much as it was punishment. The Academy used it to break cadets who didn't fit their mold, scenarios so brutal that most participants washed out within hours. Sir, may I ask why? She said, though she already knew the answer. Vel Prime's smile was cold. Your performance in standard exercises has been unconventional. We feel you would benefit from more challenging scenarios. He paused, letting the words sink in. Protocol 7 will help determine whether your methods have any real value, or if they are simply the desperate tactics of a primitive species. The next morning, Hana found herself standing alone in the Academy's most advanced holographic chamber. The room was larger than any she had trained in before, with walls that seemed to stretch up into darkness. Unlike the clean, bright chambers used for standard exercises, this one felt ominous. Instructor Vex Omega materialized as a hologram in front of her. Unlike the other instructors, he had no physical form, existing only as a projection of the Academy's most advanced AI. His voice carried no warmth, no encouragement, only cold analysis. Welcome to the Shattered World scenario, he announced. This exercise simulates combat in a post-apocalyptic environment following planetary nuclear bombardment. Environmental conditions include radiation levels fatal to most galactic species, toxic atmospheric contamination, structural collapse hazards, and complete breakdown of civilized warfare protocols. The chamber around her began to transform, and Hana felt her breath catch. The clean white walls dissolved into a nightmare landscape of twisted metal, crumbling buildings, and skies the color of dried blood. The artificial air carried the smell of smoke, chemical contamination, and something else she didn't want to identify. Your objective is survival, Vex Omega continued. Enemy forces consist of rogue AI units with corrupted programming. They do not follow standard engagement protocols. They do not take prisoners. They do not recognize surrender. A countdown. Timer appeared in her field of vision. 60 minutes. That was apparently how long the Academy expected her to last. Previous record for this scenario is 47 minutes and 32 seconds, the AI announced. Participants who survive the full hour are considered to have passed the exercise. The simulation began without warning. Immediately, Hana's environmental readings spiked into the red zone. Radiation levels that would kill most alien species within minutes, atmospheric toxins that burned her lungs even through her breathing, apparatus and ground contamination that made every step potentially lethal. This wasn't warfare as the galactic community understood it. This was survival in conditions no civilized species would ever encounter. For Hana, it felt like home. She had grown up on Earth, where the radiation from their sun would blind most aliens, where the atmospheric pressure would crush their bones, where the gravity would pin them helplessly to the ground. She had trained in Earth's deserts where temperatures reached levels that would cook alien physiology, in Earth's oceans where the pressure would implode their organs, in Earth's mountains where the thin air would suffocate them. The first enemy unit appeared 30 seconds into the exercise. A spider-like robot the size of a small vehicle, its weapon systems glowing with hostile intent. Its programming had been corrupted, Vex Omega had said, which meant it fought like a wild animal rather than a civilized soldier. Perfect. Hana didn't try to fight it directly. Instead, she led it through a section of the ruined city where structural damage had left buildings barely standing. When the robot tried to follow her through a narrow passage, she brought the entire structure down on top of it, using a piece of radioactive debris as an improvised explosive. The second wave came 20 minutes later. 3 more robots, these, ones designed for different terrain. Hana had spent the time studying the environment, learning its hazards, understanding its opportunities. When the robots tracked her to an area flooded with toxic gas, they expected her to retreat. Instead, she modified her breathing apparatus using components scavenged from the wreckage around her, allowing her to operate in the contaminated zone, while the robot's sensors were blinded by the chemical fog. She picked them off one by one using their own weapons, which she had learned to operate by studying the first robot's remains. By the 40th minute, she had eliminated 7 enemy units and the simulation should have been reaching its climax. Instead, more robots kept appearing. The AI seemed confused, unable to understand why its supposedly impossible scenario wasn't breaking this human cadet. At the 1-hour mark, when the timer should have ended the exercise, Hana was still fighting. She had turned the entire ruined city into a weapon using radiation, toxins, structural collapse, and psychological warfare against enemies that weren't supposed to be vulnerable to such tactics. The robot's AI programming began to break down under her unconventional assault. They started making mistakes, falling into traps, attacking each other instead of her. She had weaponized their own confusion against them. 6 hours later, the simulation finally ended. Not because time ran out, but because there were no enemies left to fight. In the observation deck high above the training chamber, Commander Park Min-soo of the Terran Defense Force set down his coffee cup with hands that were not quite steady. He had arrived that morning to check on the human cadets' progress, expecting to see standard training exercises and perhaps offer some guidance. What he had witnessed instead was beyond anything he had imagined. "Sir," whispered Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Dae-ho, his aide. "The alien observers are requesting immediate consultations. They want to know what kind of world could produce soldiers capable of this." Park Min-soo looked down at Lieutenant Kim Hana, who was calmly collecting her equipment, in the center of what looked like a war zone. She appeared tired but unbroken, as if the last 6 hours had been merely another day at the office. "Tell them," he said quietly, "that they're about to learn why we call it a death world." In the corridor outside the observation deck, alien military officials were having hurried conversations in a dozen different languages. The words were different, but the tone was universal. Concern, confusion, and the beginning of something that might have been fear. Everything they thought they knew about warfare was about to change. The news traveled faster than Hana had expected. Within days of her 6-hour victory in the Shattered World scenario, the Academy's corridors buzzed with conversations in dozens of alien languages. She caught fragments as she passed groups of cadets and instructors. Impossible, unprecedented, dangerous. The universal translators couldn't capture the tone, but she didn't need them to understand that she had become something between a curiosity and a threat. The observation galleries that had once been empty during training exercises were now packed. Hana could see them through the transparent walls as she walked to her next session. Rows of alien faces pressed against the viewing windows, all watching her with the intensity of scientists studying a new species, which, she realized, was exactly what they were doing. Commander Park Minsu found her in the Academy's recreation area, sitting alone at a table while alien cadets gave her a wide berth. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much since arriving at the station. "Lieutenant," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "We need to talk." Hana straightened. "Sir." "The Academy has requested a joint exercise," Park said, keeping his voice low. "You and Cadet Cho Minji against their top instructors. They want to see how humans work as a team." Cho Minji. Hana had heard the name but never met her. "Isn't she from the theoretical division?" "Was," Park corrected. "They transferred her here yesterday. Apparently your performance has convinced them that all humans need to be evaluated as potential combat personnel." He paused, studying her face. "This isn't just training anymore, Lieutenant. The entire galactic military establishment is watching. What you do in there will determine how they see our entire species." The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like lead armor. "Understood, sir." That evening, Hana met Cho Minji for the first time in the Academy's briefing room. She was smaller than Hana, with the pale complexion of someone who had spent most of her career behind a desk rather than in the field. But her eyes were sharp, analytical, and when she spoke, her voice carried the confidence of someone who understood war from every angle. "I've studied your previous exercises," Minji said without preamble. "Your tactics are unconventional." "They work," Hana replied. "Yes, they do. That's what makes them interesting." Minji pulled up a holographic display showing various combat scenarios. "I've spent 5 years studying galactic military doctrine, standard formations, predictable strategies, warfare as a gentleman's game with rules everyone follows." "And?" Minji smiled, and Hana was surprised to see something almost predatory in the expression. "And it's all completely useless against real enemies. You've proven that. The question is, can we do it together?" The next morning, the main training chamber was packed with observers. The viewing galleries held military officials from every major species in the Galactic Alliance. Hana recognized some of them from the Academy's promotional materials: General Kex Vara of the Hegemony Navy, Admiral Crystalline Prime of the Vorthak Fleet, Fleet Commander Depth Singer of the Aquarian Forces. They were all here to watch 2 humans fight. The scenario appeared around them as the holographic systems activated. A remote research station under siege. The facility was isolated on a barren moon, its defensive systems failing, its garrison overwhelmed. The attacking force was massive, well-equipped, and closing in from all sides. "Your mission," announced Instructor Vex Omega, "is to defend the D research station for 12 hours until evacuation becomes possible. You have limited ammunition, no reinforcements, and the enemy outnumbers you 50 to 1. In the observation gallery, Hana could see alien officers leaning forward in their seats. This was a scenario designed to be impossible. The Academy's best instructors had tried it dozens of times and never lasted more than 3 hours. "Standard doctrine," whispered Admiral Crystalline Prime to his aide, "would be to establish defensive perimeters and conserve resources. The humans will probably attempt the same approach," replied the aide, "though perhaps with less organization." They were both wrong. Instead of setting up defensive positions, Hana and Minji spent the first hour studying the research station itself. While the attacking AI forces organized their assault, the humans were taking inventory of everything the facility contained: laboratory equipment, medical supplies, maintenance tools, experimental materials. "The chemistry lab has industrial-grade acids," Minji reported, her voice crackling through their communication system. "Medical bay has surgical lasers and anesthetic gas," Hana replied from another section of the station. "And the physics lab has some interesting power cells." What they did next made the alien observers lean forward in their seats with growing alarm. The humans didn't just defend the research station, they turned it into a weapon. Laboratory acids became improvised explosives. Medical anesthetics became area denial weapons. Surgical equipment became precision tools for sabotage. Within 2 hours, the sterile research facility had been transformed into a death trap that would have made military engineers proud. But that was just the beginning. When the first wave of attackers reached the station's perimeter, they encountered defenses that shouldn't have existed, corridors that had been rigged to collapse, laboratory equipment that had been repurposed into automated defense systems, and atmospheric controls that had been modified to create environmental hazards. Minji demonstrated something the observers had never seen before: a human's capacity for sustained combat operations. While alien species typically fought in shifts, resting and rotating personnel, she maintained continuous operations for 18 straight hours. Her analytical mind processed battlefield information with mechanical precision, coordinating defenses and planning counterattacks without pause. Hana showcased humanity's adaptability in ways that left the alien observers speechless. She switched between roles with fluid ease. Sniper, when long-range precision was needed. Demolitions expert when obstacles required removal. Hand-to-hand. Combatant when the enemy breached their defenses. Medic when Minji needed first aid for minor injuries. By the 6th hour, something unprecedented happened. The humans stopped defending and went on the offensive. They left the research station entirely, using the surrounding terrain and their own improvised equipment to hunt the attacking forces. What should have been a desperate last stand became a systematic elimination of enemy units by 2 soldiers who refused to accept that they were outnumbered. The AI controlling the attacking forces began making increasingly desperate moves, sending units into obvious traps because its programming couldn't adapt to opponents who fought like apex predators rather than civilized soldiers. At the 12-hour mark, when the scenario was supposed to end with evacuation, there were no enemies left to evacuate from. The humans had won a battle that was designed to be unwinnable. The training chamber fell silent as the holographic environment dissolved around them. Hana and Minji stood in the center of the white room, their equipment scattered around them, their uniforms torn and stained, but their eyes bright with victory. In the observation gallery, rows of alien military officials sat in stunned silence. The battle they had just witnessed violated every principle of warfare they understood. It challenged everything they believed about combat, strategy, and the nature of conflict itself. General Kex Vara of the Hegemony Navy was the first to speak, his voice carrying across the silent gallery. "These aren't soldiers, they're apex predators wearing uniforms." Admiral Crystalline Prime's body flickered with rapid light patterns that his aide recognized as deep confusion. "How do we fight alongside beings like this?" "A better question," replied Fleet Commander Depth Singer, his aquatic voice bubbling with unease, "is how do we fight against them if we ever have to?" The implications of that question rippled through the gallery like a shockwave. For the first time in galactic history, a species had demonstrated military capabilities that made the established powers question their own supremacy. Down in the training chamber, Hana and Minji were calmly collecting their equipment, seemingly unaware that they had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The age of human warfare had begun. The Academy's central chamber had never hosted so many high-ranking officials at once. Representatives from every major military power in the galaxy filled the observation decks, their conversations creating a low hum of nervous energy that seemed to vibrate through the station's walls. They had all come to witness the ultimate test, the one challenge that had broken every cadet who attempted it, the Reaper simulation. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Jiwon stood at the center of the massive holographic chamber, checking his equipment one final time. Unlike the younger cadets who had impressed the galaxy over the past month, Jiwon carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen real warfare. His hair was gray at the temples, his hands bore the small scars that came from decades of actual combat, and his eyes held the steady gaze of a man who had faced death and walked away. Commander Park Min-soo watched from the human observation section, feeling the weight of every alien gaze in the chamber. The past month had been a whirlwind of emergency meetings, hastily arranged conferences and increasingly urgent requests from galactic military leaders who wanted to understand what they were dealing with. "Sir," whispered his aide, "the Centaurian delegation is requesting another private briefing about Earth's military capabilities." "Tell them what I told the others," Park replied without taking his eyes off G1. "If they want to understand human warfare, they can watch and learn." Director Velprime's voice echoed through the chamber as he began the briefing. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. "The Reaper simulation represents our most advanced combat scenario. It is based on the galaxy's most feared enemy, a synthetic collective with adaptive learning capabilities and no programmed limitations on violence." The chamber around G1 began to transform. The clean white walls dissolved into a nightmarish landscape of twisted metal and burning cities. In the distance, mechanical shapes began moving with predatory purpose. The Reapers were machines, but they moved with an organic fluidity that made them somehow more terrifying than any living enemy. "Previous attempts at this scenario have lasted an average of 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Velprime continued. "The record is 7 minutes and 12 seconds, set by General Kexvara 3 years ago. No cadet has ever completed the full Y scenario." In the observation deck, alien military officials leaned forward in their seats. Many of them had attempted this simulation themselves and knew firsthand how quickly the Reapers could adapt to any strategy, any tactic, any approach an opponent might try. The countdown reached 0, and the simulation began. The first wave of Reapers approached with mechanical precision, their sensors scanning G1's position, their adaptive algorithms already analyzing his equipment and probable strategies. These weren't mindless drones. They were artificial intelligences designed to learn from every encounter, to become more efficient with each battle. What happened next would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. G1 didn't engage the Reapers directly. Instead, he disappeared. While the alien observers searched the holographic battlefield trying to locate him, G1 had gone underground. Literally. He had found a maintenance tunnel system that existed in the simulation's environmental programming, but wasn't part of the combat parameters. The Reaper's sensors could detect enemies above ground, but their programming hadn't accounted for someone who would abandon the battlefield entirely. For the next hour, the Reapers searched for an enemy who wasn't where enemies were supposed to be. Their adaptive algorithms began processing contradictory information. Target acquired but not visible. Weapons fire detected but no source identified. Strategic positions compromised by an opponent who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere. "At once, what is he doing?" asked Admiral Crystalline Prime, his translucent body flickering with confused light patterns. "He's breaking their programming," replied Commander Park Minsu. "The Reapers are designed to adapt to conventional warfare, but humans don't fight conventional wars." G1 emerged from the tunnel system behind the Reapers' command post. While their forces had been searching for him in the wrong places, he had been studying their communication patterns, learning their weaknesses, understanding how their collective intelligence operated. Then he began to lie to them. Using captured Reaper communication equipment, G1 started feeding false information into their network. He convinced a group of Reapers that another group had been compromised by enemy infiltrators. He made them believe that their own command structure had been corrupted. He turned their adaptive intelligence against itself, creating paranoia and confusion in minds that were supposed to be perfectly logical. The result was unprecedented. The Reapers began fighting each other. "Impossible," breathed General Kexvara. "They're machines. They can't be confused or deceived." "They're intelligent machines," Juwan's voice came through the chamber's communication system as he continued his psychological warfare campaign. "Intelligence creates patterns. Patterns can be exploited." By the end of the second day, the Reapers' collective intelligence was fragmenting. Units that should have been coordinating their efforts were instead hunting each other based on false information G1 had planted in their communication networks. Their adaptive algorithms, designed to make them stronger, were instead making them paranoid and erratic. On the third day, G1 went on the offensive. He had spent 2 days learning everything about how the Reapers operated, their strengths, their weaknesses, their blind spots, and most importantly, their absolute dependence on their collective intelligence network. Now he was ready to exploit all of it. Using a combination of captured Reaper technology, improvised weapons, and tactics that no artificial intelligence could have predicted, G1 began systematically dismantling their forces. When they adapted to one approach, he abandoned it entirely and tried something completely different. When they cornered him, he used their own weapons against their command structures. When they tried to overwhelm him with numbers, he turned their collective intelligence into a liability by feeding it information that made coordination impossible. The Reapers, designed to be the ultimate enemy, found themselves facing an opponent who refused to fight by any rules they understood. Every time they learned something new about his tactics, he changed everything and became someone completely different. 3 days and 17 hours after the simulation began, the last Reaper, unit powered down, its artificial mind overwhelmed by contradictions it couldn't resolve, the holographic battlefield fell silent except for the sound of G1's breathing as he stood among the wreckage of an enemy that was supposed to be unbeatable. The observation galleries were completely silent. Hundreds of the galaxy's most experienced military minds sat in stunned disbelief at what they had just witnessed. A single human had not just defeated the Reapers, he had systematically destroyed them, using methods that challenged every assumption about warfare, intelligence, and the nature of conflict itself. Director Vel Prime was the first to break the silence. His golden scales had turned pale, and his forearms trembled as he approached the human delegation. He began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. We need to completely restructure our combat doctrine. Everything we thought we knew about warfare has just become obsolete. The implications rippled through the chamber like shockwaves. If a single human could defeat the galaxy's ultimate military challenge, what did that say about humanity as a whole? If human tactics could overcome artificial intelligence designed to be perfect, what would happen when those tactics were applied on a galactic scale? Within hours, emergency communications were being sent across the galaxy. Military leaders who had dismissed Earth as a primitive death world were suddenly requesting detailed information about human military history, human strategic thinking, human approaches to conflict resolution. Within days, the Galactic Defense Academy announced a complete overhaul of its curriculum. Traditional alien military doctrine, refined over thousands of years, was being replaced by crash courses in human warfare principles. Cadets who had spent years learning proper formation fighting were now studying guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and adaptive strategy. Within a month, every major military power in the galaxy had begun recruiting human advisors and requesting access to Earth's military archives. The history of human warfare, from ancient battles fought with sticks and stones to modern conflicts involving weapons that could destroy planets, became required reading for alien officers who suddenly realized they had been playing at war while humans had been perfected by it. And in the depths of space, species that had never heard of Earth began receiving quiet warnings from their intelligence services. Somewhere in the galaxy was a small blue planet whose inhabitants had just revolutionized warfare itself. They were called humans, and they were unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. The age of human military dominance had begun, not through conquest or aggression, but through the simple demonstration that when it came to warfare, the Deathworlders had been teaching themselves lessons that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. In the corridors of the Academy, alien cadets now spoke of human tactics with the same reverence their ancestors had once reserved for legendary heroes. And in the observation decks where it all began, a new generation of military minds was learning that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to fight by your rules.